The cruel dawn sun pierced through the frost-covered windows of the Wells Fargo Stagecoach as Catherine James clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders. April 1876 had brought an unseasonably cold spring to the New Mexico territory, and the journey to Santa Fe had already stretched her last pennies and her fraying resolve to their breaking points. The rattling coach lurched to a stop at a dusty way station, still a day's journey from her destination, and the mustached driver called for everyone to present payment for the remainder of the trip. "I'm afraid there must be some mistake," Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible over the impatient huffing of the horses. "I purchased a ticket all the way to Santa Fe." She fumbled through her small leather purse, knowing with sinking certainty that no additional money would miraculously appear. The station master, a barrel-chested man with cold eyes, snatched her ticket and examined it with contemptuous precision. "This is marked only to Cimarron Junction, madam. You need $8 more to continue to Santa Fe." "But I specifically asked for—" Catherine's protest died on her lips as the man's expression hardened. The mistake wasn't his, and they both knew it. She had been so desperate to escape Chicago after her father's death that she'd barely counted her meager inheritance before purchasing what she thought was a through ticket to Santa Fe, where her mother's cousin had promised her work as a schoolteacher. "No money, no ride," the station master declared, already turning to the next passenger. "You can wait for the next coach in 3 days if you can come up with the fare by then." Catherine's blue eyes filled with tears as the other passengers averted their gazes, embarrassed by her predicament but unwilling to intervene. The driver seized her small trunk and unceremoniously dropped it onto the hard-packed earth of the way station yard. "Madam, you need to step down now. We're running behind schedule." With as much dignity as she could muster, Catherine descended from the coach, her legs stiff from the 2-day journey. The way station was little more than a crude collection of buildings, a general store that doubled as a post office, a shabby saloon, and what appeared to be a livery stable. Around them, the vast New Mexico landscape stretched into infinity, beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. "What am I to do?" she asked, addressing no one in particular as the station master and driver ignored her, busy loading mail bags onto the coach. "I believe this might resolve the lady's difficulty," came a deep voice from behind her. Catherine turned to see a tall man leading a magnificent chestnut stallion toward the stagecoach. Dust covered his worn denim pants and faded blue shirt, but something in his bearing suggested a natural authority that his rough clothing couldn't disguise. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but when he tilted his head up, Catherine found herself looking into the most startling pair of green eyes she had ever encountered. "Samuel Northrup," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "I couldn't help but overhear your predicament, Miss James." "Catherine James," she replied, straightening her spine despite her humiliation. Samuel reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. $8 for the lady's passage to Santa Fe," he announced, counting out the coins into the station master's suddenly attentive palm. "Sir, I cannot possibly accept," Catherine began, but Samuel interrupted her with a gentle wave of his hand. "Consider it a loan, Miss James. Santa Fe is my destination as well, though I prefer the freedom of my own mount to the confines of that bouncing torture chamber." His mouth curved into a smile that transformed his weathered face. The West is no place for a woman to be stranded without funds or friends. Before Catherine could formulate a proper response, the station master handed her a new ticket. "Better board now, madam. We leave in 2 minutes." "How will I repay you?" Catherine asked, clutching the ticket as if it might disappear. Samuel's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Santa Fe isn't so large that we won't cross paths again. I have business at the governor's office next week. Perhaps by then, you'll be settled enough to buy me a cup of coffee as repayment." Something in his manner respectful yet warm made Catherine nod her agreement. "Thank you, Mr. Northrup. I am in your debt in more ways than one." As the driver hoisted her trunk back onto the coach, Samuel tipped his hat. "Safe journey, Miss James. I'll be riding alongside for a while, keeping an eye on things." The stagecoach rumbled back to life, and Catherine settled into her seat, watching through the window as Samuel swung effortlessly onto his stallion. For the first time since leaving Chicago, she felt a flutter of something that might have been hope rising in her chest. The journey to Santa Fe continued with Samuel Northrup riding alongside the coach for several hours. Occasionally, Catherine would catch glimpses of him through the dusty window, sometimes close enough that she could see the strong line of his jaw, other times just a distant silhouette against the vast New Mexico sky. The other passengers had noticed the cowboy's presence too, and speculation about his identity filled the otherwise tedious journey. "That's Sam Northrup," an elderly gentleman informed them, stroking his silver beard with authority. "Owns one of the biggest cattle operations north of Santa Fe. Started with nothing after the war and built it all himself." A plump woman in a purple bonnet leaned forward eagerly. "I heard he was a captain in the Union Army, very decorated, very mysterious about his past though." Catherine listened but offered no comment. Whatever Samuel Northrup's story was, he had shown her kindness when she most needed it, and that was enough to earn her gratitude, if not her trust. Chicago had taught her that men's kindnesses often came with hidden prices. As the day wore on, the terrain grew increasingly rugged. The coach struggled up steep inclines, passengers gripping the leather straps hanging from the ceiling as they were tossed about like corn in a popper. During one particularly harrowing descent, Catherine heard shouts outside and felt the coach accelerate dangerously. "Bandits!" The elderly man cried, peering through the window. "Two riders coming fast." The driver's whip cracked urgently above the team of horses, and the coach lurched forward at an alarming speed. Catherine clutched her seat, terror rising in her throat as the vehicle careened along the narrow mountain road. Through her window, she saw Samuel spurring his chestnut stallion ahead of the coach. With fluid precision, he drew a Winchester rifle from its scabbard and turned in his saddle. The crack of gunfire rang out, followed by shouts Catherine couldn't understand. The coach continued its frantic pace for several more minutes before finally slowing. When it stopped completely, the door was yanked open, and Samuel's face appeared, concern evident in his eyes as they immediately sought her out. "Everyone all right in here?" he asked, his gaze lingering on Catherine's pale face. The passengers nodded, murmuring their thanks and asking about the bandits. Samuel's expression hardened. "Local troublemakers. They won't be bothering any more stagecoaches." He didn't elaborate and no one pressed for details. "We'll be moving on now. Should reach Santa Fe before nightfall if we make good time." As he turned to leave, Catherine leaned forward. "Mr. Northrup," she called softly. When he looked back, she simply said, "Thank you." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that was becoming familiar. "Just doing what needs doing, Miss James." The remainder of the journey passed without incident. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert landscape in fiery hues of orange and crimson, the outskirts of Santa Fe came into view. Catherine felt her heart quicken at the sight of the adobe buildings glowing in the late afternoon light. This would be her new beginning, far from the smoke and grief of Chicago. Samuel had ridden ahead and was waiting when the stagecoach pulled into the station. As Catherine descended, her legs unsteady after the long journey, he appeared at her side, offering his arm for support. "Welcome to Santa Fe, Miss James," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Not as fancy as Chicago, I expect, but it has its charms. How did you know I'm from Chicago?" She asked, surprised. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Your accent, and your trunk has a Chicago luggage tag." Catherine felt her cheeks warm at his observant nature. "Yes, well, I hope to become a proper New Mexican soon enough. You mentioned you have family here." Samuel asked, assisting as the driver unloaded her trunk. The question brought a renewed wave of anxiety. "Not exactly. My mother's cousin, Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, has arranged a teaching position for me at the local school. I'm to stay with her until I find suitable accommodations." Samuel's expression changed subtly. "Eleanor Whitfield of Palace Avenue? Yes, do you know her?" He hesitated before answering. "Santa Fe is a small town in many ways, Miss James. I know of Mrs. Whitfield." Something in his tone suggested there was more he wasn't saying. "Do you have her address?" I'd be happy to escort you there. Catherine withdrew a slightly crumpled paper from her reticule. Number 412 Palace Avenue. She wrote that it's not far from the plaza. It's not, but these streets can be confusing for newcomers, and with evening approaching. He let the sentence hang unfinished, but Catherine understood his concern for her safety. I would appreciate the escort, Mr. Northrup, thank you. Samuel arranged for her trunk to be delivered later, then offered his arm again. Catherine placed her gloved hand lightly upon it, acutely aware of the strength she could feel beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. They walked in companionable silence through the narrow streets, Catherine taking in the foreign beauty of the adobe architecture, so different from Chicago's brick and stone. It's lovely, she murmured, more to herself than to her companion. It grows on you, Samuel replied, his affection for the place evident in his voice. Especially the light. There's something about the quality of light here that can't be found anywhere else. As they turned onto Palace Avenue, the grand homes of Santa Fe's elite came into view. Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness. Her cousin's letters had described a comfortable existence, but these residences spoke of considerable wealth. They stopped before a large adobe home with a beautifully carved wooden door. Before Samuel could knock, the door swung open to reveal a thin woman with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face, which might once have been pretty, was now a map of disapproving lines. "You're late," she stated flatly, her gaze moving from Catherine to Samuel with obvious displeasure. "And I see you've already managed to attract attention." Catherine felt Samuel stiffen beside her, but his voice remained perfectly civil. "Good evening, Mrs. Whitfield. I had the pleasure of escorting your cousin from the Stagecoach station." Eleanor Whitfield's thin lips pressed together. "How gentlemanly of you, Mr. Northrup. Catherine, come inside at once. Your trunk arrived some time ago, and I've had to tip the delivery men extra for their weight." Catherine turned to Samuel, mortification heating her cheeks. "Thank you again for your kindness, Mr. Northrup. About repaying you another time," he interjected smoothly, "when you've settled in." With a tip of his hat to both women, he turned and walked away, his tall figure silhouetted against the deepening blue of the evening sky. Eleanor seized Catherine's arm and pulled her inside, shutting the door firmly. "Of all the men in Santa Fe, you had to arrive on the arm of Samuel Northrup," she muttered. "I can see I'll need to keep a closer eye on you than I anticipated." "What do you mean?" Catherine asked, confused by her cousin's reaction. Mr. Northrup was nothing but kind and honorable. Eleanor's laugh held no humor. Kind, perhaps in his way, but suitable company for a young woman of good breeding? Absolutely not. She guided Catherine through an elegantly furnished parlor toward the back of the house. "The man is a cowboy who got lucky with cattle and land speculation. No family to speak of, no proper connections. He may have money now, but breeding shows, or in his case, the lack of it." Catherine bit her tongue, unwilling to argue on her first night in her cousin's home. But something about Eleanor's dismissal of the man who had helped her so generously didn't sit right. "Your room is through here," Eleanor continued, opening a door to reveal a small but well-appointed bedroom. "You'll begin at the school on Monday. That gives you tomorrow and Sunday to rest and prepare. I've taken the liberty of selecting appropriate attire for a schoolteacher." She gestured to several somber dresses laid out on the bed. "Thank you," Catherine managed, though the dresses all in shades of brown and gray looked more suited to a funeral than a classroom. "We dine at 7 precisely," Eleanor informed her, moving toward the door. "I'll send Maria to help you freshen up." At the threshold, she paused. "And Catherine, in future, please remember that your behavior reflects on me. Santa Fe society is small but exacting. A young woman in your circumstances cannot afford even a hint of impropriety." The door closed with a quiet but definitive click, leaving Catherine alone with her thoughts and a sudden, overwhelming sense of having exchanged one prison for another. The first week in Santa Fe passed in a blur of new experiences for Catherine. The school where she taught was a modest adobe building near the plaza, filled with children from both Hispanic and Anglo families. Despite Eleanor's warnings about the difficulties of teaching such a mixed group, Catherine found her students eager to learn and generally well-behaved. Her fluency in Spanish, learned from her mother years ago, proved invaluable in communicating with some of the younger children and their parents. Eleanor's home, though physically comfortable, was emotionally stifling. Her cousin maintained a rigid schedule and expected Catherine to adhere to it without question. Meals were taken in near silence, punctuated only by Eleanor's occasional critiques of Catherine's teaching methods, appearance, or deportment. The older woman seemed determined to reshape Catherine into a proper frontier lady, one who would attract a suitable husband from Santa Fe's limited pool of eligible men. Judge Harmon's son will be at service on Sunday, Eleanor announced over breakfast, exactly 1 week after Catherine's arrival. Andrew Harmon is 35, never married, and stands to inherit his father's considerable estate. I've mentioned to Mrs. Harmon that you'll be joining us in our pew. Catherine looked up from her oatmeal, carefully choosing her words. That's very thoughtful, Cousin Eleanor, but I've only just arrived. I'm not seeking a husband at present. Eleanor's teacup clattered against its saucer. Not seeking, Catherine, be sensible. You are 22 years old with no fortune and no family besides myself. Your position at the school pays barely enough for necessities. What future do you imagine for yourself without a husband? A future of my own making, Catherine replied quietly. My father always encouraged me to be independent. And look where that led him, Eleanor sniffed. Dying penniless after a series of foolish investments. Is that the example you wish to follow? The unfair assessment of her beloved father stung, but Catherine swallowed her anger. I simply mean that I would prefer any marriage I enter to be based on mutual affection rather than convenience. Eleanor's laugh was sharp. Affection? You've been reading too many novels, my dear. Marriage is a practical arrangement, especially in a place like this. Speaking of practical matters, she continued, not giving Catherine a chance to respond, I've invited several guests for dinner tonight. The governor and his wife, Judge Harmon and his son, and the Blackwoods, who own the largest mercantile in town. Catherine nodded, resigned to an evening of being displayed like merchandise. What time should I be ready? 7 o'clock, and wear the blue dress I purchased for you. It's the most flattering to your complexion. Eleanor rose from the table. And please do something with your hair. Those loose curls may have been acceptable in Chicago, but here they appear, untamed. As Eleanor swept from the room, Catherine sighed and finished her breakfast. The morning light streamed through the window, illuminating the courtyard garden with its riot of early summer blooms. Somewhere beyond the high adobe walls lay the real Santa Fe, the one she caught glimpses of walking to and from school, with its vibrant markets, diverse people, and sense of limitless possibility. And somewhere in that Santa Fe was Samuel Northrup, to whom she still owed a debt. In the week since her arrival, she had caught no glimpse of him, though she had looked for his tall figure and distinctive chestnut horse each day. The memory of his kind green eyes and easy smile had stayed with her, a bright spot in her increasingly constrained new life. Catherine arrived at school that morning to find her students unusually excited. They clustered around the windows, pointing and chattering in a mix of Spanish and English. Miss James, there are cowboys in the plaza," young Miguel Ortiz exclaimed, his dark eyes wide with excitement. "Cowboys come to town all the time, Miguel," Catherine reminded him gently, setting her books on the desk. "Now everyone take your seats so we can begin our lessons. But these cowboys have so many cattle," piped up Sarah Johnson, a freckle-faced girl of 9. "Papa says it must be the Northrup herd coming through on the way to the railroad." At the name, Catherine's heart gave an unexpected leap. She moved to the window, unable to resist looking. The plaza was indeed filled with activity cowboys on horseback, guiding a substantial herd of longhorn cattle through the town center, their bellows filling the morning air. Townspeople lined the route, some cheering, others simply watching the impressive spectacle. And there, astride his chestnut stallion, was Samuel Northrup. Even from a distance, his commanding presence was unmistakable. He rode at the front of the herd, occasionally calling out instructions to his men, his hat tilted back on his head to reveal that strong, sun-bronzed face. As if sensing her gaze, Samuel suddenly looked toward the schoolhouse. Catherine stepped back from the window, a flush warming her cheeks at being caught staring, but it was too late. He had seen her. With a quick word to one of his cowboys, he turned his horse and rode directly toward the school. The children erupted in fresh excitement. "Miss James, Mr. Northrup is coming here," Sarah squealed. "Children, please take your seats immediately," Catherine instructed, fighting to keep her voice steady. "We have arithmetic to complete before lunch." A knock at the classroom door made her jump. Taking a deep breath, Catherine smoothed her skirts and went to answer it, aware of 20 pairs of curious eyes following her every move. Samuel Northrup stood in the doorway, hat in hand, the morning sun creating a halo of light around his tall figure. Up close, he looked even more handsome than she remembered, though there were new lines of fatigue around his eyes. "Miss James," he greeted her, his voice warm. "I hope I'm not interrupting your class." "We were just about to begin our arithmetic lesson, Mr. Northrup," she replied, conscious of the children straining to hear every word. "I won't keep you then." His green eyes held hers. "I only wanted to see if you've settled in well. And perhaps to remind you about that cup of coffee you promised me." The last was said with a smile that made her heart perform an entirely inappropriate somersault. Before Catherine could respond, a small voice called out from behind her. "Miss James, is this your beau?" Horrified, Catherine turned to see Miguel grinning impishly at her. "Miguel Ortiz, that is quite enough. Mr. Northrup is an acquaintance who helped me when I first arrived in Santa Fe." Samuel's eyes danced with amusement. "Just an acquaintance hoping to improve our friendship, Miss James." He glanced past her to the classroom full of openly fascinated children. "Perhaps Sunday after church. I believe there's a new cafe on the plaza that serves decent coffee." Catherine knew she should refuse. Eleanor would be furious, especially with the Harmons attending the same service. But something in Samuel's expression, a mixture of hope and uncertainty that belied his confident manner, made her nod. "Sunday after church would be lovely, Mr. Northrup. Thank you." His smile widened, transforming his entire face. "Until Sunday, then." He settled his hat back on his head, nodded politely to the children, and turned to leave. "Mr. Northrup," Catherine called impulsively. When he looked back, she said, "Good luck with your cattle drive." "Thank you, Miss James, I'll need it." 2,000 head to Santa Fe Station, and every one of them with a mind of its own. With a final tip of his hat, he was gone, leaving Catherine to face a classroom of children bursting with questions and her own inexplicable sense of anticipation. The dinner party at Eleanor's home that evening was exactly as Catherine had feared, a thinly veiled opportunity for her cousin to parade her before Santa Fe's elite as a potential bride. Andrew Harmon, a balding man with watery blue eyes and a perpetual expression of mild dyspepsia, had been seated beside her at Eleanor's explicit instruction. His conversation consisted primarily of complaints about the town's inadequate law enforcement and detailed descriptions of his various digestive ailments. "The problem is the Mexican food," he informed Catherine as she picked at her roast beef. "Too much chili. Plays havoc with a sensitive constitution like mine. I stick to plain American fare meat and potatoes, the occasional boiled vegetable." "How fascinating," Catherine murmured, trying not to visibly wilt from boredom. Across the table, Eleanor was engaged in animated conversation with the governor's wife, but her sharp eyes frequently darted to Catherine, clearly monitoring her interaction with Andrew. "I understand you're a teacher," Andrew continued, dabbing at his thin lips with a napkin. "A respectable temporary occupation for a young lady, I suppose, though naturally you would give it up upon marriage." Catherine's spine stiffened. "I find teaching deeply fulfilling, Mr. Harmon. I wouldn't consider it temporary at all." Andrew blinked, clearly surprised by her response. "But surely a lady of your refinement would prefer the comforts of managing a proper household. My home on Canyon Road has 5 bedrooms and a dedicated cook. A wife would have ample time for social calls and charity work." Before Catherine could form a suitably polite but firm rejection, Eleanor clinked her glass for attention. "I've just had the most wonderful news from Mrs. Blackwood," she announced to the table. There's to be a social gathering at the governor's mansion next Saturday, a proper ball to celebrate Territorial Day. Isn't that marvelous? Mrs. Blackwood, a plump woman dripping with jet beads, nodded enthusiastically. The first such event in 3 years. Everyone who is anyone in Santa Fe will attend. How lovely, Catherine remarked, grateful for the interruption. It sounds like a wonderful community celebration. Mrs. Blackwood's painted eyebrows rose. Oh, my dear, it's hardly for the entire community. Invitations are quite restricted. Only the finest families will be present. Speaking of which, Eleanor interjected smoothly, I do hope that troublesome cattle business will be concluded by then. Last year, Samuel Northrup's herd delayed their passage through town until the very day of the governor's garden party. The dust and smell were simply intolerable. Governor Ashton, a portly man with impressive side whiskers, chuckled. Northrup's operation brings considerable revenue to the territory, Mrs. Whitfield. A little dust seems a small price to pay. Perhaps, Eleanor conceded with a thin smile. But one wishes he would conduct his business with more consideration for those of us who must maintain certain standards. The man himself may have acquired wealth, but he remains fundamentally rustic. Andrew Harmon snorted in agreement. My father denied his application for membership to the Territorial Club just last month. Cattle money doesn't equate to gentility, after all. Catherine felt a surge of indignation on Samuel's behalf. Mr. Northrup struck me as quite gentlemanly when I met him, she said, unable to remain silent. He was kind enough to assist me when I found myself in difficulty during my journey here. A sudden silence fell over the table. Eleanor's face tightened with displeasure. Yes, Catherine mentioned this. Encounter, she said, her voice brittle. A brief roadside assistance that she has perhaps romanticized somewhat. My cousin is new to the territory and doesn't yet understand the social distinctions that are so important here. I understand kindness when I see it, Catherine replied quietly. And integrity. Andrew Harmon cleared his throat. Northrup's background is rather obscure. Arrived here after the war with nothing but that rifle he carries and somehow accumulated land and cattle with remarkable speed. Some say not all his acquisitions were entirely above board. That's unfair, Andrew, Governor Ashton objected. Northrup fought with distinction in the Union Army and has been nothing but an asset to this territory since his arrival. His methods may be direct, but I've never known him to act dishonorably. Direct indeed, sniffed Mrs. Blackwood. Did you hear about his confrontation with the Martinez brothers last month? Nearly came to blows in the middle of the plaza over water rights. The Martinez brothers were diverting water from Northrup land that rightfully belonged to 3 other ranches as well, the governor pointed out. Northrup was defending not just his interests, but those of his neighbors too. Catherine listened, fascinated by these glimpses into Samuel Northrup's life and character. There seemed to be much more to the quiet, confident cowboy than she had initially realized. Eleanor, clearly displeased with the turn in conversation, rose from her chair. Shall we ladies retire to the parlor for coffee while the gentlemen enjoy their cigars? Catherine, perhaps you might favor us with a piece on the piano. As the women moved to the parlor, Mrs. Blackwood linked her arm through Catherine's. My dear, a word of friendly advice, she whispered. Your cousin has your best interests at heart. Andrew Harmon may not be the most exciting man, but he offers security and position. A young woman in your situation would be wise to consider such advantages carefully. My situation, Catherine echoed. Mrs. Blackwood's smile didn't reach her eyes. An orphan with limited means and no connections beyond your cousin. Eleanor has been most generous in bringing you into her home and introducing you to society. It would be a shame to disappoint her expectations through imprudent associations. Catherine understood the warning perfectly. By the time she seated herself at the piano, her fingers were trembling with suppressed anger. She launched into a Chopin nocturne, allowing the music to express the emotions. She couldn't voice her frustration with Eleanor's manipulations, her resentment at being treated as a burden to be married off, and her growing determination to chart her own course in this new place. And beneath it all, a flutter of anticipation for Sunday, when she would see Samuel Northrup again, not as a chance-met stranger, but as someone who had deliberately sought her out. Someone whose green eyes had lit up at the sight of her. Someone who made her feel, for the first time since arriving in Santa Fe, that she might find not just survival here, but happiness. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect New Mexico day that made Catherine understand what Samuel had meant about the quality of light. As she dressed for church, selecting her best blue dress and carefully arranging her dark curls, she felt a nervous excitement that had nothing to do with religious devotion. Eleanor eyed her appearance with suspicion over breakfast. "You've taken unusual care with your toilette this morning, Catherine. I trust you're making an effort for Andrew Harmon's benefit." Catherine hesitated. She hadn't mentioned her coffee arrangement with Samuel, knowing Eleanor would forbid it. "I simply thought I should look my best for church," she replied, avoiding a direct lie. Eleanor seemed satisfied with this answer, and they departed for the Presbyterian church, where Santa Fe's Protestant elite gathered each Sunday. The service passed in a blur for Catherine, who found herself repeatedly glancing toward the door, half expecting to see Samuel's tall figure. But he wasn't there, and as they filed out afterward, Eleanor firmly steered her toward the waiting Harmon men. "Judge Harmon has kindly invited us to Sunday dinner," Eleanor announced. "Isn't that lovely, Catherine?" Panic flared in Catherine's chest. "That's very kind, but I'm afraid I've already made another commitment for this afternoon." Eleanor's smile froze. "What commitment could you possibly have made without consulting me?" Before Catherine could answer, a familiar deep voice called her name. She turned to see Samuel approaching, looking remarkably different in a well-tailored dark suit and crisp white shirt. His usually unruly brown hair had been neatly combed, and he had trimmed his beard. The overall effect was striking, still unmistakably rugged, but with an added polish that made several nearby ladies take appreciative notice. "Miss James," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "I hope I'm not too early for our coffee engagement." Eleanor's face flushed an alarming shade of red. "Coffee engagement? Catherine, what is the meaning of this?" Catherine lifted her chin. "Mr. Northrup and I arranged to have coffee after church." "I was just explaining to you that I wouldn't be able to join the Harmons for dinner." "This is completely inappropriate," Eleanor hissed. "You did not ask my permission for this. This assignation." Samuel's green eyes hardened slightly, though his voice remained perfectly civil. "Mrs. Whitfield, I assure you my intentions are honorable. Miss James and I are meeting in a public cafe in broad daylight, hardly an assignation. I simply wish to ensure she's settling comfortably into Santa Fe and to become better acquainted." Judge Harmon stepped forward, his aristocratic features set in an expression of distaste. "Northrup," he acknowledged curtly, "I wasn't aware you attended church services." "Not regularly at this one, I admit," Samuel replied easily. "My ranch hands and I typically attend the small chapel near my property, but I had a particular reason to be in town today." His gaze returned to Catherine, warming visibly. Andrew Harmon inserted himself between them. "Miss James has already accepted our invitation to dinner," he declared, though this was untrue. Catherine had endured enough. "Actually, Mr. Harmon, I had not yet responded to your kind invitation because I already had plans with Mr. Northrup." She turned to Eleanor. "Cousin, I apologize for not mentioning this sooner, but it simply slipped my mind during the busy week. I'll be home before dark." Without waiting for Eleanor's response, she placed her hand on Samuel's offered arm. "Shall we, Mr. Northrup? I believe you mentioned a cafe on the plaza." Samuel's eyes gleamed with admiration at her boldness. "Indeed I did, Miss James." With a polite nod to the astonished group, he led Catherine away, leaving her cousins sputtering in their wake. "I fear I've caused trouble for you," Samuel said when they were out of earshot. "That wasn't my intention." Catherine's heart was racing from her own daring. "The trouble was already there, Mr. Northrup. You merely provided an opportunity for it to surface." She glanced back at Eleanor's rigid figure. "My cousin has very specific ideas about what's best for me, none of which include coffee with a cattle rancher, no matter how successful." Samuel chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "I'm familiar with Mrs. Whitfield's opinions of my suitability or lack thereof." She made them quite clear when I attempted to purchase the parcel of land adjacent to her property last year. You must think me terribly rude, speaking of my cousin this way, Catherine said, suddenly conscious of her impropriety. Not at all. I think you honest, which is refreshing. He guided her across the plaza toward a small cafe with cheerful yellow awnings. In my experience, the society ladies of Santa Fe reserve their honest opinions for private gossip sessions, presenting only carefully constructed facades in public. I'm learning that skill, Catherine admitted with a small smile, though not quickly enough for Aliner's taste. The cafe was bustling with after-church patrons, but Samuel secured them a small table near the window. Catherine was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Samuel Northrup was clearly a known figure in Santa Fe, and her own status as Aliner Whitfield's poor relation had doubtless been thoroughly discussed in local drawing rooms. Once seated with coffee and a plate of fresh pastries between them, Samuel regarded her with genuine interest. How are you finding Santa Fe, Miss James? Beyond your cousin's supervision, I mean. Catherine considered the question. It's beautiful in a way I never imagined. So different from Chicago, the light, the colors, the pace of life, and I enjoy teaching very much. The children are wonderful. But, Samuel prompted, sensing her reservation, but I sometimes feel I've exchanged one cage for another, she admitted quietly. In Chicago, after my father died, it was poverty and limited opportunities that constrained me. Here, it's Aliner's determination to see me suitably married off to someone like Andrew Harmon. Samuel's expression darkened slightly at the mention of Harmon. And is that what you want? A suitable marriage. I want a life of my own choosing, Catherine replied simply. I had hoped teaching would provide that independence, but the salary is barely enough to live on, as Aliner frequently reminds me. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Independence comes at a high price for a woman in this territory, or anywhere, I imagine. You speak as if you understand, Catherine observed. A shadow crossed his face. I understand the value of freedom, Miss James. I spent 4 years fighting for it, and another 7 building something that was entirely my own. He seemed about to say more, but instead took a sip of his coffee. Tell me about your teaching. What subjects do you cover with the children? Catherine allowed the change of subject, describing her classroom and students with enthusiasm. Samuel listened attentively, asking intelligent questions about her methods and challenges. As their conversation flowed from teaching to books to music, Catherine found herself increasingly drawn to this complex man so different from the rough cowboy she had initially imagined. You surprise me, Mr. Northrup, she confessed, after he had shared an insightful opinion on Dickens. I wouldn't have expected a cattle rancher to be so well-read. His smile held a hint of self-deprecation. Winter nights are long on a remote ranch, Miss James. Books are good company when the snow makes travel impossible. And do you spend those long nights alone? The question slipped out before Catherine could consider its impropriety, and she immediately flushed. I apologize, that was terribly forward of me, but Samuel didn't seem offended. Yes, I do, he answered simply. My foreman and some hands live in cabins nearby, but the main house is just me and too many empty rooms. Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. It wasn't built for a solitary man. The implication hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Catherine found herself wondering what kind of woman Samuel had envisioned sharing those rooms when he built them, and whether he might be considering her as a candidate for that role now. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. They had met only twice before today, yet she felt a connection to him that defied rational explanation. Was it merely gratitude for his kindness? Or something deeper, something with the potential to change the course of her carefully planned new life? Before she could sort through these unsettling questions, the cafe door opened to admit Aliner Whitfield, accompanied by Mrs. Blackwood. Their entrance was clearly no coincidence. Aliner's piercing gaze immediately locked onto Catherine and Samuel's table. It appears our time is up, Samuel murmured, following Catherine's gaze. Your cousin is not one to surrender easily. No, she isn't, Catherine agreed, gathering her reticule. I should go with her to avoid a scene. Samuel stood as the women approached. Mrs. Whitfield, Mrs. Blackwood, he greeted them with impeccable politeness. What a pleasant surprise. Eleanor's smile was glacial. Mr. Northrup, Catherine, it's time we returned home. I have a headache developing and require your assistance. Catherine recognized the transparent excuse but nodded dutifully. Of course, Cousin Eleanor. Turning to Samuel, she extended her hand. Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Northrup. It was most enjoyable. He took her hand, holding it perhaps a moment longer than strictly proper. The pleasure was mine, Miss James. His eyes held hers, conveying what he couldn't say aloud. Perhaps we'll have the opportunity to continue our conversation another time. Perhaps, she echoed, aware of Eleanor's narrowing eyes. As Eleanor practically dragged her from the cafe, Catherine glanced back to see Samuel watching her departure, his expression a mixture of regret and determination that sent a shiver of anticipation down her spine. The confrontation began the moment they arrived home. Eleanor, who had maintained a rigid silence during the carriage ride, exploded once they were inside the privacy of the parlor. How dare you embarrass me publicly, she cried, pacing the carpet like a caged panther. Refusing the Harmons' invitation to gallivant with that cowboy. I didn't gallivant anywhere, Catherine replied, struggling to keep her voice level. I had coffee in a public establishment with a gentleman who has shown me nothing but kindness and respect. Eleanor's laugh was harsh. A gentleman. Samuel Northrup is a fortune hunter who rose from nothing through dubious means. He's seeking entree into society through you, can't you see that? Your connection to me, tenuous as it is, represents his opportunity to gain social acceptance. The unfairness of this assessment stung Catherine to anger. That's absurd. Mr. Northrup has his own fortune and seems entirely uninterested in society's approval. Furthermore, I am hardly a prize for a fortune hunter, being penniless myself and dependent on your charity as you so frequently remind me. Eleanor flinched at the bitter words. For a moment, her imperious facade cracked to reveal something like hurt. Is that how you see it? As charity? I brought you here because your family, Catherine, because I promised your mother before she died that I would look after you if anything happened to your father. The revelation silenced Catherine's retort. You never told me that. Eleanor sank onto the settee, suddenly looking tired. Lorraine was my favorite cousin. We were close as sisters before she married your father and moved to Chicago. When she wrote to me of her illness, I promised to watch over you if necessary. I never imagined it would actually come to pass. Catherine sat beside her cousin, seeing the older woman in a new light. I didn't know you and my mother were close. She spoke of you rarely. We had differences of opinion about her choice of husband, Eleanor admitted. Your father was charming but impractical. I feared he would bring her nothing but instability, and unfortunately, I was right. She sighed deeply. I don't want to see you make a similar mistake, Catherine. You deserve security after all you've endured. And you believe Andrew Harmon represents security? Catherine asked softly. I believe he represents a respectable future, Eleanor corrected. Samuel Northrup, for all his current success, comes from nothing and could return to nothing. His fortune depends on cattle subject to disease, drought, and falling prices. His manner is rough, his background questionable. What kind of life could he offer you? Catherine thought of Samuel's intelligent eyes, his thoughtful conversation, the way he had described his home built for a family he didn't yet have. Perhaps one with happiness as well as security. Eleanor's expression hardened again. Happiness is a luxury, Catherine. Survival comes first. I had hoped you learned that lesson in Chicago. I learned that lesson all too well, Catherine replied, rising from the settee. Which is why I cannot and will not marry without affection, regardless of the material advantages such a match might bring. I appreciate your concern for my future, Cousin Eleanor, but my heart must have some say in the matter. Eleanor stood as well, drawing herself up to her full height. Very well. Since you refuse to be guided by my superior experience, I will no longer interfere in your social affairs. But understand this, if you pursue an attachment to Samuel Northrup, you do so without my blessing or support. And in this town, my dear, that will make your path exceedingly difficult. It was both a concession and a warning. Catherine understood that Eleanor was offering her freedom to choose, but at a potentially high cost. I understand, she said simply. I hope you do. Alina moved toward the door, then paused. The governor's ball is Saturday next. Despite today's unpleasantness, I expect you to attend with me. Whatever your feelings about Andrew Harmon, he is from one of Santa Fe's finest families, and you would be wise to remain in their good graces. After Alina left, Catherine stood alone in the parlor, staring out at the garden where twilight shadows lengthened across the flagstone path. The conversation with her cousin had revealed unexpected depths to their relationship and to Alina herself. Not merely a cold, status-obsessed spinster, but a woman fulfilling a promise to a beloved cousin, trying to provide security in the only way she understood. Yet, Catherine couldn't surrender her heart to satisfy that promise. Whatever developed between her and Samuel Northrup friendship, or something more, she needed to explore it honestly, even if it meant disappointing Alina. Even if it meant making her own way in Santa Fe without her cousin's powerful social connections. The thought was terrifying. And strangely exhilarating. The week passed without word from Samuel, though Catherine found herself watching for him constantly on her walks to and from school, during her brief shopping excursions, even from the window of her classroom. Alina maintained a cool politeness, neither mentioning Samuel again nor preventing Catherine from going about her usual activities. The unspoken truce was fragile but holding. On Thursday afternoon, as Catherine was dismissing her students for the day, a young boy appeared at her classroom door clutching an envelope. "Miss James," he called. "I got a letter for you from Mr. Northrup. He said to put it right in your hand and nobody else's." Catherine's heart leapt as she accepted the envelope, slipping the messenger boy a penny for his trouble. She waited until the last child had departed before breaking the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in a bold, clear hand. "Dear Miss James, I hope this letter finds you well, and that my previous attentions have not caused you undue difficulty with your cousin. My cattle business has required my presence at the railhead these past days, which is why I have not called upon you again. I have learned that you will be attending the governor's ball on Saturday evening. I too have received an invitation, somewhat to my surprise. Perhaps Governor Ashton is more broad-minded than some of his associates. If it would not discomfit you too greatly, I would be honored if you would save a dance for me. Just one would be sufficient to make the tedium of such formal occasions bearable. With sincere regards, Samuel Northrup." Catherine read the letter 3 times, a smile spreading across her face at his formal yet somehow playful tone. She could almost hear his voice speaking the words, particularly the wry comment about the governor's broad-mindedness. One dance. It was a modest request, yet she knew that even this would raise eyebrows among Santa Fe's elite and provoke Alina's displeasure. Still, Alina had promised not to interfere further, and a dance at a public ball could hardly be considered inappropriate. Having no means to send a reply, Catherine tucked the precious letter into her reticule and headed home, her steps lighter than they had been all week. The prospect of seeing Samuel again filled her with anticipation that made even Alina's cool greeting when she arrived home easier to bear. "The dressmaker delivered your gown for the ball," Alina informed her over dinner. "I've had Maria press it and hang it in your wardrobe. It's perhaps more youthful than I would typically choose, but Mrs. Blackwood insisted the pale green would complement your coloring." "Thank you," Catherine said, genuinely grateful. "That was thoughtful of you and Mrs. Blackwood." Alina nodded stiffly, accepting the thanks. "Judge Harmon mentioned that Andrew will be calling for us in his carriage Saturday evening. I've told him you would be pleased to have his escort." So that was to be Alina's strategy, not preventing Catherine from seeing Samuel at the ball, but ensuring she arrived with Andrew Harmon firmly in attendance. It was a subtle manipulation, but effective. Catherine couldn't reasonably refuse the offered transportation without appearing ungrateful and causing the very scene Alina had been so concerned about on Sunday. "How kind of Mr. Harmon," she replied neutrally, unwilling to either confirm or deny her pleasure at the arrangement. Alina's eyes narrowed slightly at Catherine's non-committal response, but she said nothing more on the subject, turning the conversation instead to school matters. Saturday evening arrived with a flurry of preparation. Catherine bathed with the scented soap Alina had provided, then sat patiently as Maria, the household maid, arranged her dark curls in an elegant style adorned with small pearls that had belonged to Alina's mother. The gown, when Catherine finally donned it, was lovelier than she had expected. The pale green silk complemented her fair skin and dark hair perfectly, while the modest décolletage and slim silhouette flattered her slender figure without being inappropriately revealing. "You look beautiful, señorita," Maria said softly, adjusting the fall of the skirt, "like a spring flower." Catherine smiled at the young Mexican woman who had been unfailingly kind since her arrival. "Thank you, Maria, for everything." Maria's dark eyes were knowing. "You are hoping to see someone special tonight, yes, not Señor Harmon, I think." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "Is it that obvious?" The maid laughed. "Only to another woman. Men never notice such things." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I have seen Samuel Northrup in town many times. He is a good man, fair to his workers, kind to children. My cousin's husband works on his ranch and says he pays better than most and never treats the Mexican hands differently from the Anglo ones." This simple endorsement meant more to Catherine than all of Alina's warnings about Samuel's unsuitability. "Thank you for telling me that, Maria." A knock at the bedroom door heralded Alina's arrival. She entered already dressed in a handsome gown of deep purple satin that suited her mature dignity. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Catherine. "Well," she said after a moment, "Mrs. Blackwood was right about the color. You look most presentable." From Alina, this constituted high praise. Catherine responded with genuine warmth. "Thank you for the beautiful dress, Cousin Alina. It's more elegant than anything I've ever owned." Something softened in Alina's expression. "Every young woman deserves at least one truly beautiful gown," she said. "Especially for her first important ball." She held out a small velvet box. "These were your mother's. I've kept them all these years, waiting for the right occasion to give them to you." Inside the box lay a pair of delicate pearl earrings with small emerald drops that perfectly matched Catherine's gown. Tears sprang to her eyes as she lifted them. "Mother's earrings. I remember her wearing these on special occasions. Father gave them to her on their 10th anniversary." "Yes," Alina confirmed, her voice unusually gentle. "Lorraine treasured them. She would want you to wear them tonight." As Maria helped her fasten the earrings, Catherine studied her cousin's face, seeing past the stern exterior to the woman who had loved her mother enough to fulfill a deathbed promise, even at considerable inconvenience to herself. Whatever their differences regarding Samuel, Alina genuinely cared for her in her own way. "Thank you," Catherine said again, this time embracing her cousin impulsively. After a startled moment, Alina returned the embrace with surprising warmth. "You're welcome, my dear." She stepped back, resuming her more typical brisk manner. "Now, I believe I hear Andrew's carriage arriving. We mustn't keep him waiting." The governor's mansion blazed with light as they approached, every window illuminated against the velvet darkness of the New Mexico night. Carriages lined the circular drive, depositing elegantly dressed guests who proceeded up the wide steps to where Governor and Mrs. Ashton greeted each arrival personally. Andrew Harmon, resplendent in formal evening wear that somehow still managed to look uncomfortably tight around his neck, escorted Catherine and Alina with punctilious correctness. His conversation during the short carriage ride had consisted mainly of complaints about the dust and his hopes that the refreshments would include nothing spicy, as his digestion was particularly delicate today. As they entered the ballroom, Catherine couldn't help but gasp at the splendor. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the polished floor, while garlands of early summer flowers adorned the walls. A small orchestra played from a raised dais at one end of the room, and couples were already beginning to dance. "Quite impressive for a territorial outpost," Alina commented, though her tone suggested she had seen far grander affairs in her youth. Andrew immediately claimed Catherine's hand for the first dance, a sedate waltz that he performed with technical correctness and absolutely no joy. As they circled the floor, Catherine scanned the room for Samuel, but saw no sign of his tall figure among the crowd. Perhaps he had changed his mind about attending. Or perhaps his invitation had been rescinded. She had heard enough about Santa Fe politics this week to know that such petty maneuvers were common. The thought filled her with unexpected disappointment. She had been looking forward to this evening primarily because of the chance to see Samuel again, to share at least one dance with him. Now, faced with the prospect of an entire evening of Andrew Harmon's company, she found her spirits sinking rapidly. After the waltz concluded, Andrew escorted her to where Alina stood conversing with Judge Harmon and several other prominent citizens. The judge greeted Catherine with formal politeness, though his eyes held the same assessing look she had seen at church, as if he were evaluating a potential acquisition rather than meeting a young woman. "Miss James is adjusting quite well to Santa Fe," Alina was saying. "Her students adore her, and Mrs. Blackwood tells me she's received several invitations to tea from the mothers." "Excellent," the judge responded, though his tone suggested Catherine's teaching career was of minimal interest. "A young lady of your background should integrate seamlessly into our society, with proper guidance, of course." His pointed glance at Alina made his meaning clear. With her cousin's influence, Catherine could expect to be accepted despite her limited means. The conversation continued in this vein for some time, with Catherine contributing only when directly addressed. She was beginning to despair of enjoying any part of the evening when a sudden hush fell over the nearby guests. Following their gaze, Catherine turned to see Samuel Northrup entering the ballroom. He cut an impressive figure in formal evening attire, the black tailcoat emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders, the white waistcoat and cravat a striking contrast to his sun-bronzed skin. His brown hair had been neatly combed, and his beard trimmed to perfect precision. But it was his confident bearing that drew all eyes. He moved with the easy grace of a man completely comfortable in his own skin, regardless of his surroundings. Governor Ashton broke away from his guests to greet Samuel warmly, clasping his hand and engaging him in conversation. Whatever the governor said made Samuel laugh, the sound carrying across the room to where Catherine stood, sending a flutter through her chest. "I'm surprised Northrup actually came," Judge Harmon muttered. "These affairs are hardly his natural habitat." "Perhaps he's attempting to improve his social standing," Alina suggested, her eyes darting to Catherine with unmistakable warning. Before Catherine could respond, the orchestra began another waltz, and Andrew promptly claimed her hand. "I believe this is our dance, Miss James." As Andrew led her onto the floor, Catherine caught Samuel's eye across the room. He had spotted her, and the warmth of recognition in his gaze made her breath catch. Even as she moved through the steps with Andrew, her attention remained fixed on Samuel, who was now making his way around the perimeter of the ballroom, exchanging brief greetings with various guests. When the waltz ended, Andrew led her back toward Alina, but before they could reach her cousin, Samuel appeared in their path. "Good evening, Miss James, Mr. Harmon," he greeted them, his deep voice sending a pleasant shiver down Catherine's spine. "You both look very well tonight." Andrew's posture stiffened. "Northrup," he acknowledged curtly, "if you'll excuse us, I'm escorting Miss James back to her cousin." "Actually," Samuel replied, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face, "I was hoping Miss James might honor me with the next dance." "If you're not previously engaged, of course," he added, addressing Catherine directly. Before Andrew could object, Catherine smiled and extended her hand. "I would be delighted, Mr. Northrup." The look of outrage on Andrew's face might have been comical if Catherine hadn't been so aware of the social breach she was committing. Accepting 2 consecutive dances from different partners was perfectly acceptable. Deliberately leaving one escort for another was not. But something about Samuel's presence made conventions seem suddenly less important than following the dictates of her own heart. As Samuel led her onto the dance floor, the orchestra began a livelier piece, a polka, that required more spirited movement than the previous waltzes. "I hope you don't mind the exercise," Samuel said, taking her in the proper hold. "I requested something more energetic. Waltzes always remind me of funeral processions." Catherine laughed, delighted by his candor. "I love polkas, though I rarely get to dance them." Alina considers them too boisterous for a lady of refinement. Then I'm doubly glad I requested it, Samuel replied with a grin that transformed his handsome face. Ready. Without waiting for her answer, he swept her into the dance with surprising skill. Catherine had expected competence at best, certainly not the fluid grace with which he guided her through the intricate steps, matching her movements perfectly as they whirled around the floor. "You dance beautifully," she said, breathless with both exertion and pleasure. "Where did a cattle rancher learn to polka so well?" His green eyes twinkled with mischief. "Would you believe me if I said it was part of my military training?" "Not for a moment," Catherine retorted, matching his playful tone. "Smart woman." He executed a perfect turn, bringing her back into hold without missing a beat. "My mother was a dancing instructor in Boston before she married my father. She insisted I learn properly even after we moved west, said a gentleman should know how to dance, no matter where he lives." The mention of his parents surprised Catherine. Samuel rarely spoke of his past, and she had begun to think he had no family. "Your parents, are they still in the West?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, they died in a cholera outbreak when I was 16. That was in Kansas, where we had a small farm. After they were gone, I worked as a farmhand until the war broke out. Then I enlisted." "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly, understanding now why he'd been reticent about his background. "My mother died when I was 12 and my father just last year. I know how it feels to lose both parents." Something changed in Samuel's expression, a deepening of connection as he recognized their shared experience of loss. "It's a hard thing," he agreed quietly. "Makes you grow up fast." As the polka continued, Catherine found herself enjoying not just the dance, but the man himself, his strength, his surprising gentleness, the way his hands supported her with respectful firmness. When the music finally ended, she was flushed and breathless, her heart racing with more than physical exertion. "Thank you for the dance, Miss James," Samuel said, his voice low as he returned her to the edge of the floor. "It was everything I hoped it would be." "As was mine, Mr. Northrup," she replied, aware of curious eyes watching their interaction. Eleanor was across the room, her expression thunderous as she observed their return. Samuel followed her gaze and sighed. "I've put you in an awkward position with your cousin again." "That wasn't my intention. I'm capable of making my own decisions," Catherine assured him, "and I decided that dancing with you was worth whatever consequences might follow." A slow smile spread across his face. "That's the most encouraging thing anyone has said to me in months." He hesitated, then added more seriously, "Would it be too forward of me to ask if you might consider riding out to see my ranch next weekend? With a proper chaperone, of course. I'd be happy to send a carriage for you and anyone you deem appropriate." The invitation took Catherine by surprise. It represented a significant escalation from coffee or a dance, a clear indication of serious interest. I would like that very much," she answered honestly, "though I'm not sure Eleanor would approve any chaperone for such an excursion. Perhaps Maria," Samuel suggested. "I've met her brother Miguel at the Mercantile. He speaks very highly of his sister and of you." Catherine was touched that Samuel had thought carefully enough about the propriety of his invitation to have a specific chaperone in mind. "I'll ask her. And I'll find a way to come, with or without Eleanor's blessing." The boldness of her own statement startled her, but Samuel's expression, a mixture of pleasure and respect, confirmed she had said exactly the right thing. Before he could respond, however, Andrew Harmon materialized at her side, his thin face flushed with annoyance. "Miss James, your cousin is asking for you," he announced, deliberately turning his back on Samuel. "Something about introducing you to the governor's wife." "Of course," Catherine replied, knowing she couldn't reasonably refuse. She turned to Samuel. "Thank you again for the dance, Mr. Northrup. The pleasure was mine, Miss James." Samuel's eyes held a promise that made her heart skip. "Until next weekend, perhaps." As Andrew led her away, practically bristling with indignation, Catherine couldn't suppress a smile. The evening that had started so unpromisingly had become something magical, not because of the grand surroundings or elegant company, but because of one man who looked at her as if she were the only woman in the room. Later, as their carriage returned them to Eleanor's home, Her cousin maintained a frigid silence while Andrew expounded at length about the inadequacies of the refreshments. Only when they had bid the Harmon men good night and entered the house did Alina finally speak. "I hope you're satisfied with your performance tonight," she said icily. "You've managed to insult the Harmons, embarrass me, and become the subject of gossip throughout Santa Fe society all in a single evening." Catherine removed her wrap, too emotionally drained for another confrontation. "I danced with a gentleman who requested the honor. There was nothing improper in that." "Nothing improper," Alina's voice rose. "You abandoned Andrew Harmon mid-conversation to dance with a man I specifically warned you against. Every matron in that ballroom noticed, I assure you." "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you," Catherine said, meaning it. "That wasn't my intention, but I cannot and will not pretend indifference to a man I genuinely admire simply to satisfy social expectations or to please the Harmons." Alina studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You're falling in love with him," she stated flatly. It wasn't a question. Catherine hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. "I don't know yet, but I believe I could, given time and opportunity to know him better. And has he made his intentions clear?" "He's invited me to visit his ranch next weekend," Catherine admitted. "With a chaperone, of course. He suggested Maria might accompany me." Alina's eyebrows shot up. "He's moving rather quickly for a man who claims honorable intentions." "It's an invitation to see his home, not a proposal," Catherine pointed out, though the thought sent a not unpleasant flutter through her stomach. "And he's been nothing but respectful." Alina sighed deeply, sinking onto the hall bench with uncharacteristic weariness. "You're determined to pursue this, aren't you? Despite my concerns, despite the social obstacles, despite knowing almost nothing about the man beyond his current prosperity and obvious charm." Put that way, Catherine's attraction to Samuel did seem hasty, perhaps even foolish. Yet she couldn't deny the powerful connection she felt with him, something deeper than mere physical attraction or gratitude for his kindness. "I'm determined to know him better," she said carefully, "to see if what I feel now might grow into something lasting." "Isn't that what you want for me, ultimately? A marriage based on genuine affection rather than convenience? What I want," Alina replied, rising to her feet, "is for you to be secure and happy in that order. I fear Samuel Northrup can offer neither in the long term." She moved toward the stairs, then paused. "But you're a grown woman, and I did promise not to interfere further. If you wish to visit Northrup's ranch with Maria as chaperone, I won't forbid it. I ask only that you proceed with caution and keep your wits about you." Men like Northrup, men who have built themselves from nothing, often have secrets they'd prefer to keep buried. With that cryptic warning, Alina ascended the stairs, leaving Catherine alone with her thoughts in the dimly lit hallway. Did Samuel Northrup have secrets? Almost certainly. Everyone did, especially those who had survived war and loss as he had. But Catherine couldn't believe those secrets included anything truly dishonorable. She had seen the respect in Governor Ashton's greeting, heard Maria's endorsement of his fairness to his workers, felt the fundamental decency in his manner toward her. Yet, as she prepared for bed that night, Alina's words echoed in her mind. She was proceeding quickly, driven by feelings she barely understood. Perhaps caution was indeed warranted, not because Samuel was unworthy, but because her own heart had been so long starved of affection that she might mistake kindness for something deeper. With that sobering thought, Catherine extinguished her lamp and lay in the darkness, remembering the feeling of Samuel's arms guiding her through the polka, the warmth in his green eyes when he looked at her, the way her name sounded in his deep voice. Whatever secrets he might harbor, whatever obstacles society might place in their path, she knew with growing certainty that Samuel Northrup was a man worth knowing better, perhaps even a man worth loving. The week dragged interminably for Catherine, each day at school stretching longer than the last as she anticipated Saturday's visit to Samuel's ranch. Alina maintained a polite but cool distance, clearly disapproving but honoring her promise not to interfere. Maria had readily agreed to serve as chaperone, her dark eyes dancing with romantic excitement at the prospect. On Wednesday, a package arrived from Samuel, a handsome leather-bound copy of Middlemark, with a note recalling their discussion of George Eliot at the cafe. Catherine was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift, especially as she had mentioned only briefly how much she admired Eliot's work. Friday evening found her fretting over what to wear for the ranch visit. Her wardrobe consisted primarily of the summer dresses Eleanor had deemed appropriate for a schoolteacher, none of which seemed suitable for the occasion. "Perhaps this one, Señorita," Maria suggested, holding up a blue calico dress that Catherine had brought from Chicago. "With a fresh white collar and cuffs, it will look very pretty, and it is practical for a ranch visit." "You're right," Catherine agreed, running a hand over the familiar fabric. "And Mr. Northrup seems to appreciate practicality." Maria smiled knowingly as she laid out the dress. "Señor Northrup appreciates you, Señorita. This is clear to anyone with eyes." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "We barely know each other, Maria. Tomorrow is about becoming better acquainted, nothing more." "Of course," the young Mexican woman agreed, though her expression remained decidedly romantic. "But when a man invites a lady to see his home, his intentions are usually serious. My José courted me for 6 months before he brought me to meet his mother." The comparison made Catherine's heart race. Was Samuel's invitation tantamount to a declaration of serious interest? And if so, was she ready for such rapid progression in their relationship? These questions occupied her thoughts until sleep finally claimed her well past midnight. When she woke the next morning, it was to find Santa Fe enveloped in one of its perfect spring days, clear blue sky, gentle breeze, and air so crisp it seemed to sparkle. By 10 o'clock, she and Maria were ready and waiting in the front parlor. Eleanor had gone out early, ostensibly to visit Mrs. Blackwood, but more likely to avoid witnessing Catherine's departure with Samuel. It was both a relief and a disappointment. Catherine had hoped her cousin might soften her stance once she saw how properly the visit was being conducted. "The carriage is here, Señorita," Maria called from the window, her voice pitched high with excitement. Catherine smoothed her skirts and checked her reflection one last time in the hall mirror. The blue calico was indeed flattering, and she had pinned her dark curls into a style that was neat but not severe. Taking a deep breath, she opened the front door just as Samuel reached the top step. He looked different again today, neither the rough-clad cowboy of their first meeting nor the formal gentleman of the ball, but something in between. His brown trousers and blue shirt were of good quality, his boots polished to a shine, and his usually unruly hair tamed beneath a clean Stetson. Most striking was his expression when he saw her, a mixture of admiration and something deeper that made Catherine's breath catch. "Miss James," he greeted her, removing his hat. "You look lovely this morning." "Thank you, Mr. Northrup," she replied, hoping her voice didn't betray her nervousness. "May I present Maria Ortiz, who has kindly agreed to accompany us today?" Samuel bowed politely to Maria. "Señorita Ortiz, thank you for coming. I believe you know my foreman's wife, Mrs. Jimenez." Maria's face lit up. "Isabella Jimenez. Yes, we attended school together as girls. She'll be serving lunch at the ranch today and is looking forward to seeing you again," Samuel told her, clearly pleased by this connection. The carriage waiting at the curb was not the plain vehicle Catherine had expected, but a handsome barouche with gleaming woodwork and a matched pair of bay horses. Samuel helped both women aboard, then took the driver's seat himself rather than relegating the task to a servant as most men of his standing would have done. As they moved through Santa Fe's streets, Catherine was acutely aware of curious glances from passers-by. By sundown, all of Eleanor's social circle would know about this excursion. The thought might have troubled her a week ago. Now she found she didn't care. Let them talk. She was doing nothing improper or shameful. Once beyond the town limits, the landscape opened dramatically vast stretches of high desert, dotted with piñon and juniper, rolling hills leading to distant mountains. Samuel pointed out landmarks as they drove, naming mountain ranges and ancient trails with the ease of someone who knew this land intimately. "There," he said after they had traveled about an hour, gesturing toward a green valley nestled between two gentle slopes. "That's Northrup Ranch." Catherine leaned forward eagerly. The valley was beautiful, a verdant oasis amid the arid landscape, with a clear stream winding through its center. Grazing cattle dotted the hillsides, and in the valley proper stood a collection of buildings centered around a large two-story house built of timber and local stone. "It's wonderful," she breathed, genuinely impressed. "How many acres do you have?" "About 20,000 now," Samuel replied. "I started with just 200 a parcel no one else wanted because the water rights were disputed. Took me 3 years, and every penny I'd saved to prove my claim was valid." Pride resonated in his voice, not arrogance, but the satisfaction of a man who had built something substantial through his own efforts. As they approached the ranch, Catherine could see the main house more clearly. It was beautifully proportioned, with a wide porch wrapping around the first floor and tall windows designed to capture light and the magnificent views. Several smaller buildings clustered nearby: a bunkhouse, stables, a blacksmith shop, and what appeared to be a cookhouse. "Do all your hands live on the property?" she asked, noting several Mexican and Anglo men busy with various tasks. Samuel nodded. "Most do. Some have families in nearby settlements and go home on weekends. I have about 20 full-time hands, more during roundup and branding." He guided the carriage to the front of the main house, where a middle-aged Mexican woman stood waiting on the porch. As soon as they stopped, she hurried down the steps with a welcoming smile. "Isabella," Maria cried, practically leaping from the carriage to embrace the woman. While the two friends chattered rapidly in Spanish, Samuel helped Catherine down, his strong hands lingering briefly at her waist. "I hope the journey wasn't too tiring," he said, studying her face with concern. "Not at all," she assured him. "It was fascinating to see the landscape change as we traveled, and your ranch is even more impressive than I imagined." Pleasure lit his green eyes. "Would you like a tour of the house first, or would you prefer to see more of the property?" "The house, please," Catherine replied, curiosity about Samuel's private domain overcoming her usual reserve. He offered his arm, which she took, acutely conscious of the solid strength beneath her fingertips. As they mounted the porch steps, Maria and Isabella followed, still catching up on years of news but mindful of their chaperone duties. The interior of the house surprised Catherine. She had expected a bachelor's sparse quarters, perhaps with minimal concessions to comfort. Instead, she found rooms that were both masculine and inviting, well-proportioned, thoughtfully furnished, with an attention to detail that spoke of a refined aesthetic sensibility. The central hall opened to a large parlor with comfortable leather chairs and a stone fireplace. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that appeared well-read rather than merely decorative. Large windows captured the stunning views, and several good paintings, mostly Western landscapes, adorned the walls. "Did you design this yourself?" Catherine asked, running a hand along the polished oak banister of the staircase. Samuel nodded, a hint of color touching his cheekbones. "With help from a carpenter from Santa Fe. I had specific ideas about how I wanted the light to fall and how the rooms should flow into one another." "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "So much warmer than I expected." His smile held a trace of self-consciousness. "Most people are surprised. They expect cowboy primitiveness, I suppose." "I've learned not to expect anything when it comes to you, Mr. Northrup," Catherine replied, returning his smile. "You continually defy categorization." Samuel led them through the remainder of the first floor, a formal dining room, a well-appointed study, and a surprisingly modern kitchen where Isabella clearly reigned supreme. Throughout the tour, Catherine noted small touches that revealed Samuel's character. Books left open as if recently consulted, a chessboard with a game in progress, fresh wildflowers in simple pottery vases. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, including the master suite that Samuel showed them with visible awkwardness. It was a handsome room with a large 4-poster bed. But what caught Catherine's eye was a small framed photograph on the bedside table, a formal portrait of a young couple. The woman seated while the man stood behind her with a hand on her shoulder. "My parents," Samuel explained, seeing her interest. "Taken just before we left Boston. My mother had consumption, and the doctor recommended the drier air of the West." Catherine studied the photograph, noting Samuel's resemblance to his father, the same strong jaw and clear gaze, while he had inherited his mother's sensitive mouth and expressive eyes. "They look like good people," she said softly. They were. His voice held old grief, controlled but still present. "They taught me to value education, hard work, and treating others with respect, especially those society deems less worthy." The statement resonated with Catherine's own values, shaped by her father's progressive beliefs. Another thread of connection between them, another reason she felt so drawn to this complex man, despite their brief acquaintance. The tour concluded in the ranch's extensive garden, where tables had been set for lunch beneath a grape arbor. Several ranch hands and their families joined them, creating a convivial atmosphere unlike anything Catherine had experienced at Alina's formal dinners. Samuel introduced each person by name, clearly familiar with their families and concerns. He spoke Spanish easily with the Mexican workers, showing no distinction in his manner, whether addressing the ranch foreman or the youngest stable boy. During lunch, a delicious spread of traditional New Mexican dishes, prepared by Isabella Catherine, found herself seated beside Samuel at the head of the table. Their conversation flowed naturally, touching on books, music, local politics, and Samuel's plans for expanding the ranch's operations. "I've purchased 2 Hereford bulls from England," he told her, enthusiasm lighting his face. "They arrive next month. I believe crossing them with our Longhorns will produce cattle better suited to the changing market, more meat, less bone." "It sounds like a significant investment," Catherine observed. Samuel nodded. "It is, but a calculated one. The cattle industry is evolving, and those who adapt will prosper." He glanced around the table where his workers were enjoying their meal. "A lot of people depend on this ranch succeeding." "Not just me." The sense of responsibility he felt for his employees impressed Catherine deeply. Here was a man who measured his success not just in acres or cattle, but in the well-being of those who worked for him. After lunch, Samuel suggested a ride to see more of the property. Horses were brought: a gentle mare for Catherine, a spirited gelding for Samuel, and a sturdy pony for Maria, who admitted she had limited riding experience. "We'll take it slowly," Samuel promised, adjusting Catherine's stirrups himself rather than leaving the task to a ranch hand. His fingers were deft and sure, his nearness sending a flurry of warmth through her despite the propriety of his actions. The afternoon ride revealed the full beauty of Northrup Ranch. Samuel led them along the stream that was the property's lifeblood, explaining his careful water management that had transformed once marginal land into productive pasture. They rode past herds of cattle, fields of alfalfa, and finally to a hilltop that provided a panoramic view of the entire valley. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Samuel confided as they dismounted to rest the horses. Maria, discreetly chaperoning, remained a few paces behind, pretending great interest in a cluster of wildflowers. "I come here to think, especially when decisions are difficult." Catherine understood why. The view was breathtaking: mountains in the distance, the valley spread below like a living map of Samuel's achievements, the ranch buildings nestled securely at its heart. "You've built something remarkable here," she said, meaning it deeply. "It's not finished yet," Samuel replied, his gaze sweeping the landscape before returning to her face. "There's still so much I want to do, improvements to make." Something in his tone made Catherine wonder if he was speaking of more than just ranching operations. The intensity in his green eyes as they held hers suggested personal as well as professional aspirations unfulfilled. "Miss James Catherine," he began, using her first name with a hesitancy that touched her. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel..." A shout from below interrupted whatever he had been about to say. They turned to see a rider approaching at speed, kicking up dust as he urged his horse toward the main house. "That's Jim Rollins, my head wrangler," Samuel said, frowning. Something must be wrong for him to ride like that. They quickly remounted and made their way back to the ranch, where they found Rollins in urgent conversation with the foreman. Both men looked up as Samuel approached, their expressions grave. "What's happened?" Samuel demanded, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Rustlers hit the north pasture last night," Rollins reported tersely. Took about 50 head of prime stock. Miguel and Carlos found the cut fence an hour ago and followed the trail a ways. Looks like they're headed toward the territorial line. Catherine watched as Samuel transformed before her eyes, the thoughtful host replaced by a decisive leader. He fired questions at the men, absorbing their answers with swift concentration, then began issuing clear directives. Rollins, take 4 men and follow the trail. Track only, don't engage if you find them. Rivera, ride to town and inform the sheriff. Tell him I'll join his posse if he forms one. He turned to his foreman. Jimenez, check all the other boundary fences and move the herds closer to the ranch house. Double the night guards until further notice. The men nodded and departed to execute his orders. Only then did Samuel turn back to Catherine and Maria, regret evident in his expression. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I'll need to deal with this situation. Cattle rustling is a serious matter out here, not just the financial loss, but the message it sends if left unchallenged." "Of course," Catherine assured him. "We understand completely." Samuel hesitated, clearly torn between his responsibilities and his desire to continue their time together. "I had hoped. Today was meant to be." He stopped, visibly gathering his thoughts. "I'd like to speak with you privately before you leave, if that would be acceptable." Catherine glanced at Maria, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I'll wait for you in the carriage, señorita," she said, tactfully moving away. When they were alone on the porch, Samuel took Catherine's hands in his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "This isn't how I planned to do this," he began. "I had thought to wait longer to give you more time to know me better, but today, seeing you here in my home..." He took a deep breath. "Catherine, I believe I'm falling in love with you." The directness of his declaration took her breath away. "Samuel, you don't need to respond now," he interjected gently. "In fact, I'd prefer you didn't. I want you to have time to consider your feelings carefully without pressure. I know your cousin has concerns about me, about my suitability. She's not entirely wrong to be cautious on your behalf." "My feelings are my own to determine," Catherine said firmly. "Not Alina's." Samuel's smile was tender. "And that independence is one of the many things I admire about you, but this is too important for hasty decisions. I'll be coming to Santa Fe next week once this rustling matter is resolved." "May I call on you then? Properly, with your cousin's knowledge if not her blessing." The respect he showed for her need to reflect touched Catherine deeply. How different he was from Andrew Harmon, who assumed his suit would be welcome simply because of his family's position. "Yes," she answered, squeezing his hands. "I would like that very much." Relief and happiness flooded his face. For a moment, Catherine thought he might kiss her, wanted him to kiss her, but Samuel maintained his respectful distance, raising her hands to his lips instead for a brief, warm touch that sent shivers along her spine. "Until next week, then," he said, releasing her reluctantly. As the carriage carried them back toward Santa Fe, with one of Samuel's ranch hands driving this time, Catherine sat in contemplative silence. Samuel's declaration had not surprised her. She had sensed his growing feelings, but its timing and directness had. And her own response, while unspoken, was clear in her heart. She was falling in love with him too, with a speed and certainty that would have frightened her if it hadn't felt so right. "He is a good man, señorita," Maria said softly after they had traveled some distance. "The way he treats his workers, the respect he shows to everyone, these tell the true character of a person." Catherine nodded, grateful for the validation. "Yes, I believe he is, and I believe I could be very happy with him, Maria." The young Mexican woman smiled knowingly. "This is obvious to anyone with eyes, señorita. The question is whether you will have the courage to follow your heart, even if it means disappointing your cousin." It was indeed the question that occupied Catherine's thoughts as they approached Santa Fe, where Alina awaited with her disapproval and warnings. But she already knew the answer. Samuel Northrup had offered her not just security, but the promise of a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection, everything she had ever hoped for in a marriage. If that meant challenging convention and disappointing Alina, then so be it. Her father had always encouraged her to live by her own lights, to make choices based on her own values rather than society's expectations. In loving Samuel, She would be honoring that legacy and creating a future brighter than any she had dared to imagine when she first arrived in Santa Fe, penniless and alone. The week that followed Catherine's visit to Northrup Ranch passed in a strange mixture of tension and anticipation. Eleanor, upon hearing of Samuel's intention to call formally, had retreated into frigid politeness, clearly disapproving but unwilling to forbid the visit outright. Catherine, for her part, found herself both eager for and nervous about Samuel's arrival, her mind constantly returning to his declaration and her own unspoken response. News of the cattle rustling had reached Santa Fe, with reports that the territorial sheriff and a posse including Samuel had tracked the thieves into the mountains. No word had come of their success or failure, leaving Catherine anxious about Samuel's safety as well as the outcome of the pursuit. On Wednesday afternoon, as she was dismissing her students, a commotion in the plaza drew her attention. Looking out the schoolhouse window, she saw a group of riders entering town, the returning posse, dusty and trail-worn but victorious, judging by the 3 bound men being led on horseback in their midst. Her eyes immediately sought and found Samuel at the front of the group, riding beside Sheriff Taylor. He looked exhausted, with several days' growth of beard and a bandage visible on his left arm, but otherwise unharmed. Relief flooded through her at the sight of him. As if sensing her presence, Samuel looked toward the schoolhouse. When he saw her at the window, his weary face brightened with a smile that touched something deep within Catherine's heart. He raised his hand in greeting, and she returned the gesture, heedless of the curious glances from her remaining students. The following day, a note arrived from Samuel, delivered by the same young boy who had brought his previous message, "Dear Catherine, I trust this finds you well. As you may have heard, we were successful in recovering most of the stolen cattle and apprehending the rustlers, though not without some difficulty. I regret that our pursuit took longer than anticipated, delaying my return to Santa Fe. If convenient, I would like to call on you this Saturday afternoon. I have spoken with your cousin by telephone to request permission, which she has granted with what I would charitably describe as restrained enthusiasm. Until Saturday, with deepest regard, Samuel Catherine read the note several times, smiling at his wry reference to Eleanor's grudging acceptance of his visit. The fact that he had gone through proper channels, seeking her cousin's permission despite knowing it would be reluctantly given, spoke volumes about his respect for propriety and for Catherine herself. Saturday seemed an eternity away, but at last it arrived, bringing with it clear skies and Catherine's barely contained excitement. She dressed with particular care in a becoming dress of soft rose muslin that Eleanor had actually complimented when Catherine purchased it. Her dark curls were arranged in a style that was neat but not severe, with a few tendrils deliberately left loose to frame her face. Eleanor, to her credit, had made some effort to prepare for their guest. The parlor had been thoroughly cleaned, fresh flowers arranged on the side tables, and a tray of refreshments laid out. If her smile remained tight when she inspected Catherine's appearance, at least she offered no criticism. "Remember what we discussed," was all she said as they awaited Samuel's arrival. "Maintain proper decorum regardless of your personal feelings. A lady never reveals the depth of her affections too readily, even to a suitor she favors." Catherine nodded, though privately she thought such calculated restraint a poor foundation for an honest relationship. She wanted Samuel to know her true self, not a carefully curated version designed to maintain some arbitrary advantage in the courtship dance. At precisely 3 o'clock, Maria announced Mr. Northrup's arrival. Samuel entered the parlor with proper formality, looking handsomer than ever in a well-tailored suit, his hair neatly combed and his beard trimmed to perfect precision. The only hint of his recent adventures was a faint bruise on his jawline and the bandage still visible beneath his left cuff. "Mrs. Whitfield, Miss James," he greeted them with a small bow. "Thank you for receiving me today." Eleanor gestured to a chair opposite the settee where she and Catherine sat. "Please be seated, Mr. Northrup. How is your arm? We heard you were injured during the pursuit of those rustlers." "Just a graze," Samuel replied, taking the offered seat. Sheriff Taylor received worse a bullet through the shoulder that will keep him desk-bound for several weeks. How dreadful, Alina murmured, though her tone suggested she found the entire business distastefully uncivilized. I understand you recovered your cattle. Most of them, Samuel confirmed, and the thieves are now awaiting trial in the territorial prison. It was a gang that's been operating along the border for some time, preying on isolated ranches. Catherine couldn't help but ask, were you the one who caught them? A hint of a smile touched Samuel's lips at her interest. It was a joint effort. Sheriff Taylor organized the posse expertly, and several of my ranch hands tracked them through difficult terrain. I merely provided additional manpower and motivation, having a personal stake in the outcome. His modesty only increased Catherine's admiration. Alina, however, seemed determined to direct the conversation away from what she clearly considered unsuitable topics for a social call. Catherine tells me you have a most impressive library, Mr. Northrup, she said. Rather unexpected in a ranch house. If Samuel recognized the subtle dig, he gave no sign. Books have always been important to me, Mrs. Whitfield. My mother insisted on education despite our frontier circumstances. She taught school before her marriage and continued teaching my father and me as we moved west. Your mother was a teacher, Catherine asked, delighted by this connection. Mine was as well before she married my father. Samuel's green eyes warmed as they met hers. Another thing we have in common, it seems. The genuine pleasure in his voice was impossible to miss, and Catherine felt an answering warmth spread through her chest. Alina, observing this exchange, cleared her throat pointedly. Mr. Northrup, I understand you attended the military academy at West Point before the war. That's quite an accomplishment for a young man from modest circumstances. It was clearly meant as a test, perhaps even a trap. Catherine shot her cousin a reproachful look, but Samuel appeared unfazed by the implied challenge to his background. I'm afraid you've been misinformed, Mrs. Whitfield, he replied calmly. I never attended West Point. I enlisted as a private in the Union Army in 1861 and was eventually promoted to captain through field commissions. My education was adequate, but hardly elite, a combination of my mother's instruction and several excellent rural schoolteachers who took an interest in a curious farm boy. His straightforward acknowledgement of his humble origins, without either apology or defensiveness, impressed Catherine deeply. Alina, however, seemed almost disappointed that her attempt to expose some deception had failed. I see, she said. Then the rumors of your distinguished military career are perhaps exaggerated as well. That would depend on what you consider distinguished, madam, Samuel answered with the same equanimity. I served under Grant at Vicksburg and Sherman during the march to the sea. I did my duty as best I could, like thousands of other men. If I received commendations, it was because I was fortunate enough to survive situations where many good men did not. The simple dignity of his response silenced even Alina temporarily. Catherine, moved by his evident discomfort with discussing his own achievements, changed the subject to safer ground: the upcoming Territorial Day celebrations, which would include horse races and exhibitions of horsemanship. For the next half hour, the conversation remained politely superficial, with Samuel displaying perfect manners, and Alina maintaining a cool correctness that stopped just short of outright hostility. Throughout, Catherine was intensely aware of Samuel's gaze returning to her whenever propriety allowed, conveying warmth that contrasted sharply with the formality of their interaction. Finally, as the visit neared its conventional conclusion, Samuel addressed Alina directly. Mrs. Whitfield, with your permission, I would like to speak privately with Miss James before I take my leave. Alina's eyebrows rose. Privately, Mr. Northrup, that would hardly be appropriate. Perhaps in the garden, Samuel suggested. With the doors open and in full view from the house, but with enough privacy for conversation of a personal nature. His directness apparently caught Alina off guard. She glanced at Catherine, who met her gaze steadily, silently conveying that she would have this conversation with or without permission. Very well, Alina conceded reluctantly. 10 minutes, no more. I'll be watching from the parlor window. Thank you, Samuel said with genuine gratitude, rising as Alina excused herself. Catherine led him through the French doors onto the small flagstone terrace that overlooked Alina's carefully tended garden. Though it was early summer, the desert air still held a pleasant crispness, fragrant with the scent of Alina's roses. Once they were alone, or as alone as Alina's supervision allowed, Samuel turned to Catherine, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "I've rehearsed this speech a dozen times," he began, "and still don't feel adequately prepared." He drew a deep breath. "Catherine, when we met on that stagecoach, I was struck immediately by your courage and dignity in difficult circumstances. Since then, everything I've learned about you has only deepened my admiration. Your intelligence, your kindness to your students, your determination to make your own way despite obstacles, these qualities are rare and precious." Catherine's heart was racing, but she remained silent, sensing he needed to say everything he had prepared. "I know we've known each other only a short time," Samuel continued. "Under conventional circumstances, I would wait months, perhaps even a year, before speaking so directly. But our first meeting was hardly conventional, and I find I cannot bear the thought of waiting when my feelings are so clear to me." He took her hands in his touch warm and steady. "Catherine James, I love you. I believe I began falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing so bravely beside that stagecoach, and every moment since has only confirmed what my heart knew immediately." Tears welled in Catherine's eyes at the simple, heartfelt declaration. Before she could respond, Samuel continued, his voice deepening with emotion. "I want to build a life with you, not just any life, but one filled with purpose and joy and mutual respect. I want to wake each morning knowing you're beside me, to share both work and leisure, to face whatever challenges come our way together as true partners." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "I'm asking you to be my wife, Catherine. To make Northrup Ranch our home, to help me create something meaningful and lasting there." He opened the box to reveal a ring unlike any Catherine had seen, not the conventional diamond solitaire, but a perfect emerald surrounded by small diamonds in an antique gold setting. "It was my mother's," Samuel explained, seeing her surprise. "One of the few valuables she brought west. My father sold almost everything else to finance our journey, but this he kept because he said its green reminded him of the new life they were seeking together." He smiled softly. "I thought it fitting, since meeting you has given me hope for a new life as well." Catherine stared at the beautiful ring, momentarily overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. This wasn't just a proposal of marriage, but an invitation to a completely different future than she had imagined for herself. One filled with both challenges and possibilities she was only beginning to comprehend. "Your cousin doesn't approve of me," Samuel acknowledged, his eyes never leaving her face. "And there may be others in Santa Fe society who share her reservations. Life as my wife won't always be easy or comfortable. The ranch is remote, the work demanding, the comforts fewer than you might find as the wife of someone like Andrew Harmon." At the mention of Harmon, Catherine found her voice. "Do you imagine I care about such things? That I would choose empty comfort over a life of meaning and purpose, over love?" Hope blazed in Samuel's eyes. "Then yes," Catherine said simply, her heart too full for elaborate declarations. "Yes, Samuel, I will marry you. I love you to have loved you, I think, since that day in the cafe when you spoke so beautifully about the quality of light here. I want to build that life with you, to be your partner in everything, to make Northrup Ranch our home." Joy transformed Samuel's face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory," he said, his voice husky with emotion. Unable to resist any longer, Catherine raised herself on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his in a brief, sweet kiss, her first ever, and all the more precious for its innocence. Samuel responded with gentle restraint, clearly mindful of Alina's watchful presence, but the tenderness in his touch conveyed everything words could not. When they drew apart, Samuel rested his forehead against hers for a moment, savoring their closeness. "Now comes the difficult part," he murmured. Convincing your cousin not to ban me from the house entirely when we tell her our news. Catherine laughed softly, though she knew his concern was justified. She may never fully approve, but she promised not to interfere with my choices. And beneath her rigid exterior, she does want my happiness even if she doubts you can provide it. Then I'll spend a lifetime proving her wrong, Samuel vowed, straightening as the parlor door opened to reveal Eleanor's approaching figure. Starting now. Eleanor's face when they announced their engagement was a study in conflicting emotions: dismay, resignation, and perhaps a hint of reluctant respect for Samuel's forthright approach. After a tense silence, she sighed deeply. "I cannot pretend to be pleased," she said finally. "But neither can I pretend to be surprised. It's been clear from the beginning where this was headed, despite my best efforts." She fixed Samuel with a penetrating stare. "I hope you understand the responsibility you're undertaking, Mr. Northrup. Catherine has no fortune, but she comes from good family and has been raised with certain expectations regarding her treatment and position." "I understand completely, Mrs. Whitfield," Samuel replied with quiet dignity. "And I pledge to provide Catherine not just with material comfort, but with the respect and consideration she deserves as my wife and partner." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, then nodded once sharply. "See that you do." Turning to Catherine, her expression softened slightly. "If this is truly what you want, my dear, I won't stand in your way. But I do ask that you consider a proper engagement period at least 3 months before the wedding, for propriety's sake, if nothing else." Catherine glanced at Samuel, who nodded his agreement. "3 months seems reasonable," she said, squeezing his hand. "That will give us time to plan properly and for me to complete the school term." "Very well." Eleanor straightened her spine, reverting to her role as social arbiter. "We'll announce the engagement in next week's Territorial Gazette. I'll host a small reception here 2 weeks from today, nothing elaborate, but enough to make the announcement official in society." Her gaze returned to Samuel. "I assume you'll want the ceremony performed at the ranch, if Catherine agrees," he replied, looking to his fiancée for confirmation. When she nodded, he continued, "We would be honored if you would help with the arrangements, Mrs. Whitfield. Your experience and taste would be invaluable." It was a diplomatic olive branch, and Eleanor accepted it with as much grace as she could muster. "I suppose someone must ensure things are done properly. Very well, I'll assist with the planning." With that limited blessing, the die was cast. Catherine James, who had arrived in Santa Fe penniless and alone just months earlier, was now engaged to marry one of the territory's most successful ranchers, a love match that defied social expectations and promised a future limited only by their own vision and determination. As Samuel took his leave that afternoon, with a promise to return the next day for Sunday dinner, Catherine stood on the porch watching him walk to his waiting horse. The sun caught the emerald on her finger, sending flashes of green fire across the adobe wall, a fitting symbol, she thought, of the new life awaiting her with the man who had once paid her way on a stagecoach and now offered her his heart as well. The 3 months of their engagement passed in a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor, having resigned herself to the match, threw herself into wedding preparations with unexpected enthusiasm. Whatever her personal reservations about Samuel, she was determined that her cousin's wedding would be beyond reproach in terms of elegance and propriety. The announcement in the Territorial Gazette caused exactly the stir Eleanor had predicted. Santa Fe society buzzed with the news, opinions divided between those who considered it a brilliant match for a penniless schoolteacher, and those who viewed it as further evidence of Samuel Northrup's social ambitions. The engagement reception at Eleanor's home was well attended, curiosity overcoming disapproval for many who might otherwise have declined the invitation. Catherine completed the school term with some sadness at leaving her students, but excitement for her new life. The school board presented her with a handsome illustrated edition of Shakespeare's works as a farewell gift, and her students created a quilt with each child, contributing a square treasures she would always cherish. Samuel rode into town at least twice a week during their engagement, sometimes staying at the hotel for several days to court Catherine properly. They took chaperoned walks through the plaza, attended church together on Sundays, and spent long afternoons in Aliner's parlor or garden, getting to know each other more deeply through conversation that ranged from childhood memories to future dreams. "I want to expand the orchard," Samuel told her one evening as they sat on Aliner's porch, Maria discreetly embroidering nearby. "The test plantings of apple and pear trees have done well with irrigation. I think we could eventually produce enough fruit to sell commercially." Catherine loved these glimpses into his practical vision for their future. "What about a kitchen garden as well? I've always wanted to grow vegetables and herbs." "Absolutely," Samuel agreed, his eyes warming at her enthusiasm. "Isabella has started one, but she says it needs a woman's touch. She's looking forward to having you take charge of the household." "I hope I won't disappoint her," Catherine admitted. "My cooking skills are limited, I'm afraid." Samuel laughed. "Isabella would be horrified if you tried to usurp her domain in the kitchen. She's been running that aspect of the ranch since I built the house. What she longs for is someone to consult about menus and household arrangements decisions she feels should properly come from the mistress of the house." The phrase "mistress of the house" sent a pleasant shiver through Catherine. Soon she would be exactly that, responsible for making Northrup Ranch not just a successful business but a true home. As the wedding approached, Catherine made several visits to the ranch to better understand its operations and begin planning changes to the main house. Samuel had given her complete authority over the interior arrangements, explaining that he had furnished it only with basics, waiting for his future wife to make it truly comfortable. "The blue bedroom upstairs would make a perfect nursery someday," she commented during one such visit, then blushed furiously at her own presumption. Samuel's expression softened as he took her hand. "I hope it will be filled with our children," he said simply, "as many as you wish to have." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect in early September, a Saturday chosen to allow schoolchildren and ranch hands alike to attend. Aliner had insisted on certain traditional elements, despite the ranch setting. Catherine would wear a proper white gown with veil, there would be formal invitations and response cards, and the ceremony would be followed by a reception with appropriately elegant refreshments. Samuel, amused by Aliner's determination, but willing to indulge it for Catherine's sake, had arranged for the ranch's largest pasture to be transformed into a venue worthy of the occasion. A wooden platform had been constructed beneath the spreading branches of an ancient cottonwood tree, decorated with garlands of wildflowers and white ribbons. Rows of chairs faced the platform, with an aisle between them covered in a white carpet Aliner's touch, deemed necessary to protect ladies' gowns from dust. Inside the ranch house, Catherine prepared with Maria's assistance, too nervous to mind Aliner's fussing over every detail of her appearance. The gown was magnificent ivory satin with delicate lace trim, modest yet flattering to her slender figure. Her dark hair had been arranged in an intricate style crowned with a circlet of orange blossoms that held her veil in place. "You look beautiful, my dear," Aliner said as she fastened Catherine's mother's pearl necklace around her throat. For once, there was no criticism in her voice, only genuine affection. "Your parents would be so proud to see you today." Tears welled in Catherine's eyes at the mention of her parents. "I wish they could be here," she whispered. Aliner squeezed her hand. "They are here in spirit," she said with uncharacteristic sentimentality. Then, reverting to her practical self, she handed Catherine a lace handkerchief. "Careful of your rouge, it's almost time." The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion for Catherine. She would always remember the moment she first saw Samuel waiting for her at the altar, his tall figure resplendent in a new black suit. His green eyes filled with awe as she walked toward him on Judge Harmon's arm. The judge, having eventually reconciled himself to the match, had agreed to give the bride away in the absence of any male relatives. Their vows were traditional but spoken with deep sincerity, their voices carrying clearly to the assembled guests, a diverse group that included Santa Fe's elite, Samuel's ranch hands and their families, Catherine's former students and their parents, and even Governor Ashton and his wife. When the Presbyterian minister pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel's kiss was brief but tender, a promise of deeper intimacy to come. The reception that followed was a blend of formal elegance and Western hospitality, fine china and crystal on tables set beneath canvas awnings, alongside platters of barbecued beef and traditional New Mexican dishes. A small orchestra played for dancing, while children ran laughing through the meadow, their presence adding joy to the celebration. "Happy, Mrs. Northrup?" Samuel asked as they circled the dance floor for their first waltz as husband and wife. The new name sent a thrill through Catherine. "Perfectly happy, Mr. Northrup," she replied, smiling up at him. "Though I still can't quite believe this is real." His arms tightened around her slightly. "Very real," he assured her, his eyes conveying meanings beyond words, and only the beginning. As the celebration continued into evening, with lanterns illuminating the gathering and a bonfire built for warmth as the desert night cooled, Catherine found a moment to speak privately with Alina. "Thank you," she said, embracing her cousin, "for everything, bringing me to Santa Fe, giving me a home when I needed one, and ultimately allowing me to find my own path even when you disagreed with it." Alina returned the embrace with surprising warmth. "You're welcome, my dear. I may not have approved initially, but I must admit that seeing you today and seeing how that man looks at you." She hesitated. "Well, perhaps there are different kinds of security than the ones I valued." It was as close to a blessing as Alina would ever come, and Catherine treasured it all the more for its rarity. As darkness fell completely, Catherine and Samuel slipped away from the celebration to begin their life together in the privacy of their home. The main house had been discreetly vacated by the staff, with only a single lamp burning in the master bedroom upstairs. There, with gentle hands and whispered words of love, Samuel introduced his bride to the physical expression of the bond they had formed, a union of bodies, to match the union of their hearts and lives. Later, as they lay contentedly in each other's arms, Catherine marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the humiliation of being thrown from that stagecoach for lack of funds to becoming the wife of a man whose generosity had extended far beyond the $8. He had paid for her passage, a man who had given her his heart, his name, and a future brighter than any she could have imagined. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, brushing a kiss against her temple. Catherine smiled in the darkness. "That sometimes the worst moments in life lead to the best if we have the courage to keep moving forward, like a frightened but determined young woman on a dusty road to Santa Fe." Samuel suggested, his voice warm with admiration. "Like a kind-hearted cowboy who saw someone in need and acted without hesitation," Catherine countered, turning in his arms to face him. "I've never properly thanked you for that day, have I?" Samuel's laugh was low and intimate. "I believe you just did, Mrs. Northrup, quite thoroughly." Catherine felt her cheeks warm, still unaccustomed to such teasing despite their new intimacy. "Nevertheless," she said with mock severity, "I want you to know that I recognize what you did that day, not just paying my fare, but restoring my dignity when I felt most humiliated. It was the act of a truly good man." "I did nothing extraordinary," Samuel insisted. "Any decent person would have helped. But they didn't," Catherine pointed out. "Only you, and in doing so you changed both our lives forever." Samuel was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful in the dim lamplight. "Perhaps that's the secret to happiness," he said finally. "Not grand gestures or carefully calculated decisions, but those small moments of spontaneous kindness that open doors we never knew existed." Catherine nodded, settling against his chest where she could feel the steady beat of his heart. "I think you're right. And I promise to remember that lesson, to never be too busy or too proud to offer kindness when it's needed, just as you did for me." "We'll remember it together," Samuel murmured, his arms tightening around her as sleep began to claim them both. "That will be our legacy to each other, to this ranch, to the children we hope to have. A legacy of kindness that ripples outward, changing lives in ways we may never fully know." As Catherine drifted towards sleep, secure in her husband's embrace and in the knowledge of their shared vision for the future, she sent a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever fate or providence had placed her on that stagecoach and brought Samuel Northrup into her life. From that chance, encounter had grown a love powerful enough to overcome social barriers and personal doubts, a love that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead in the wild, beautiful territory they both now called home. 5 years later, on a crisp autumn morning, Catherine Northrup stood on the front porch of the ranch house, watching as her husband led their 3-year-old son Thomas on his first pony ride around the yard. The child's delighted laughter mingled with Samuel's deeper voice, creating a harmony that never failed to warm Catherine's heart. "Not too fast, Sam," she called, one hand resting protectively on the gentle swell of her abdomen where their second child grew. "He's still so little." Samuel grinned up at her, his green eyes as vibrant as the day they'd met. "He's a natural, Catherine, just like his mother on horseback." Thomas, a perfect blend of his parents with Samuel's green eyes and Catherine's dark curls, bounced excitedly in the small saddle. "Look, Mama, I'm riding." "I see, sweetheart," Catherine replied, smiling at his enthusiasm. "You're doing wonderfully." The years had brought changes to Northrup Ranch, most notably the addition of a wing to the main house that included a proper nursery and playroom, and the construction of a small schoolhouse, where Catherine now taught the children of ranch workers 3 days a week. The orchard had expanded to over 5 acres, producing fruit that was becoming known throughout the territory for its quality. The cattle operation had grown as well, with Samuel's breeding program proving so successful that ranchers from as far as Texas came to purchase his Hereford Longhorn crosses. But the most significant changes were the intangible ones, the deepening of love and trust between Catherine and Samuel, the building of a community around the ranch that included not just workers but their families, the creation of a home filled with books, music, laughter, and the patter of small feet. Eleanor visited twice yearly, her initial reservations about Samuel gradually replaced by grudging respect for his success and obvious devotion to Catherine. She remained in Santa Fe, her social position secure, though she had surprised everyone by developing a friendship with Governor Ashton's widowed brother that seemed headed toward marriage. As Samuel completed the circuit of the yard and lifted Thomas from the pony, Catherine descended the porch steps to meet them. Her husband's greeting kiss was as warm as ever, his hand moving naturally to the small bump that would become their daughter in spring. "Feeling well today?" he asked, his concern evident despite Catherine's assurances that this pregnancy was progressing perfectly. "Wonderful," she confirmed. "Dr. Martinez says everything looks exactly as it should." Thomas tugged at his father's hand. "Can we ride again, Papa, please?" Samuel chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. "Later, Cowboy. Right now, I think Mama has breakfast waiting, and we have that meeting with the new schoolteacher this morning." They walked together toward the house, a family built on that first act of kindness on a dusty road. As they reached the porch, Samuel paused, looking out over the ranch at the cattle grazing on distant hillsides, the orchards heavy with ripening fruit, the small cluster of worker homes where smoke rose cheerfully from morning cookfires. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is our life," he said softly, his arm around Catherine's waist. All of this, growing from that moment when a beautiful, proud young woman stood beside a stagecoach, refusing to beg despite having nothing. Catherine leaned into his embrace, remembering that day with perfect clarity, the humiliation that had preceded Samuel's arrival, the relief of his assistance, the first stirrings of connection that neither of them had recognized for what it would become. "I had nothing then," she agreed, looking up at the man who had changed her life with a simple act of generosity. "But now I have everything." Samuel's kiss was both tender and passionate, a reaffirmation of the love that had grown between them, a love as vast and enduring as the New Mexico sky above them, as life-giving as the water that sustained their ranch, as precious as the family they had created together. "As do I, my love," he whispered against her lips. "As do I." And hand in hand, they walked into their home, into their future, into the life they had built from that first meeting when a woman was thrown from the stagecoach for having no money, and the cowboy who paid her way gave her his heart as well.